I would like to start this talk by telling you a story. So this is actually a rather famous story, so I'm pretty sure that most of you know about it. This is a story about a developer that went through all the trouble to get hired by a company. But it's not any company. It's the company that is making one of his favorite apps that he's using every day. And so, after doing all the paperwork and the induction, he's finally ready to code. And as in many IT companies, the new developer, they are assigned to code feedback and bug fixes because, well, this is a great way to learn the stack, learn the processes, and of course, discover the product. So our young enthusiast is going through the list of bugs and choose to pick the one that is really bothering him as a user. He's working hard on it, and after a couple of days, he's able to finally push something in production. He's really happy about himself, and can you guess his next move? Right, he quitted. You probably heard this story, and I think one of the most popular versions is this tweet. And I think, even if it's a fake story, the fact that it's really popular tell us a lot about how we think, generally speaking, that companies are doing about the feedback that we are giving to them. And so today, we are here to share our experience on how we are handling and managing feedback on our site. So you're going to learn ways to get very specific feedback, why some of the traditional methods to prioritize and handle feedback can be misleading, and of course, how you can make a difference. So my name is Gael Imperial. I'm API Product Manager, and I have with me Tsolakou, Developer Advocate. And so to continue on the context, I will leave you on the hands of Anna.
Thank you, Gael, and hi, everyone. Before getting into the details, let me share with you a bit of our background and why we believe developer feedback is important. So, Gael and I, we work at Amadeus, which is a technical leader in the travel industry, and more specifically, we work at Amadeus for Developers, which is the open API program of Amadeus, connecting developers to travel data and services. And from the very first beginning of our program, we set developer feedback as our top priority, or one of our top priorities, I would say, for the following reasons. With developer feedback, you're able to know what your users expect from your product, and that makes you build a product with some features that developers would like. And also, you are able to see, sometimes what happens is your users can see things that you cannot really see from the inside, so that gives you the chance to discover some unseen aspects and perspectives of your own product. At the same time, you get to know what is happening in the market, and finally, innovative ideas are being generated that can lead to new business opportunities. So now that we saw why feedback can be important, let's see different ways of how you're able to get valuable user feedback. And the first way that I would say is the most straightforward one that most of us, I believe, we're familiar with, is getting developer feedback through customer support channels. Thanks to the customer support, developers are willing to share with you their experiences, their pain points, what they like about your product, and what they need to be successful. However, this can be very challenging because you might be overwhelmed when you have to handle the customer cases and at the same time to consolidate the feedback. So today we would like to share with you different ways that you can get more specific feedback in through the developer journey that we would like to split in 3 different steps. And the first step of the developer journey is around documentation. At this step of the journey, developers want to discover what they want to do with your API and how to use it. And at this point, you can ask for some feedback directly in the documentation pages. For example, you can add some emojis where developers can click if they like or they don't like your page. And if someone is willing to give more specific feedback, you can add a link to a feedback form. So when your users know what they can do with your APIs and how to use them, the next step for them is the API integration. And at this stage, developers want to build and test their applications using your API. Here, we would strongly advise you any developer tools and libraries that you build to make them open source. First of all, this is definitely going to enhance the developer experience, but at the same time, in open source repositories, developers will be able to give directly their feedback there. So if there is a bug, they're going to open an issue on the repository, or if they want to see a new request. And also, if there is something that really matters to them, they might make a contribution through a pull request. So now that developers have built their application, the next step of the developer journey is to move to production, which means that developers open their application to the world and they try to have a successful business and make profit out of it. At this stage, you can schedule some interviews with your top users. Maybe you have an API that is very powerful from the technical point of view, but does this mean that developers can make profit out of it? So you're definitely going to learn a lot of their journey through these calls when they have moved to production. So next time that you are thinking to release an API, ask yourself, how will I help my users make value out of this API, business value? So now that we saw how you can get feedback through the developer journey, there are also two extra things that we would like to show here. But before going there, something important is be careful because developers might put the feedback not in the right place. What happens in some cases is that, for example, in your documentation feedback form, you might get some feedback for the SDKs, or for the SDKs, maybe some feedback about your documentation. So try to guide your users and make any input forms that you have as specific as possible. Or on GitHub, create some template issues for them so you will guide them through the process. So now let's move forward to the next two tips. One is how you will be able to quickly gather feedback through the end-to-end process. Here's something that we believe can work really well is to organize hackathons. During hackathons, there will be hundreds of developers in a short amount of time, usually maybe a weekend, that are going to use your platform, and you will see how they feel from the very beginning that they register to your portal until the end that they have a solution made. And also a lot of ideas can be coming out through these hackathons. And something that we think can be very useful is if you are a new player in the API industry, you're going to get a lot of feedback and you're going to learn a lot of things for your platform that you can improve later. And the next one is the voice of your community. If you have a developer community, meaning like a single place on Discord or Slack with your users who are interested to be in this community, you can have a lot of interactions with them, some live interactions with announcements, office hours, and you can even get send to them some polls and surveys. You can get very good feedback from there. But what really makes the difference in the developer community is that you can get some collective feedback. So you can see how your users interact with each other and how they react to a specific feedback that maybe one user has given to the community. So now that we saw different ways of being able to gather developer feedback, what is next?
So, independently of the number of channels that you have implemented, you will rapidly get a huge amount of feedback. So it won't take long for you to know why your users love your product, why they come to you over the competition, but also you will receive a lot of improvement points. Actually, so much that we have to face the reality. We cannot fix them all. And so that's why you will need to have ways to handle them and prioritize them. And today I want to give you 3 tips for that. And the first one is to look for imposters. Imposters are feedback that looks great at first glance, but are actually making your product worse once you have implemented them. I think in your career, you probably have seen some of them. A typical example would be a user asking you to add a field in reply. May sound good, but this field is hosted in another database. And once you have implemented the feedback, Now your API call is taking 5 more seconds to execute. Or a user asking you to add a new parameter to better filter his query. Again, the need seems legitimate, but once you have implemented it, this parameter is actually not working well with all the other existing parameters, making it way more complicated for the new user to understand the product. And now you're spending a lot of energy in implementation and support. Those ones are quite nice imposters, but be careful. Some of them can even threaten your business model. So I would really advise you to focus on your company mission and the core value of your product. Usually, if a feedback asks you to bend too much those concepts, it's most likely an imposter, and it should be treated differently than the feedback to improve your product. My second tip is to not forget to use statistics. Do you know of Abraham Walt? So during World War II, bomber planes were critical for the Alliance, and they invested a lot of money to make sure that those planes were coming back from the battlefield. The most common method used at that time by the scientists was to look at all the plane, looking at the scratches and the bullet hole. And every time they were finding a place that were heavily impacted, they decided to reinforce it. Can you guess the impact it has on the planes? Absolutely none. And it took the statistician Abraham Wald to pinpoint the issue. They fall to the survivor bias. They were looking at the plane that were coming back, not the one that were falling in the battlefield. The same applies for your feedback. Everything you have on your backlog is in the end from people that survive your onboarding process, survive using your product, and survive your feedback process. You may miss most of the very valuable feedback that you have. So I will really advise you to think about what the user was trying to achieve and what is the business value behind. Not focus on the number of feedback that you have received on a topic or the size of the customer that is complaining. And finally, iterate. We are used to build solutions little by little, thanks to safe and agile in the IT industry. But for feedback that are usually small, we would like to deliver them fast. I would advise you to go for a quick win, workarounds, guides, and even partnerships sometimes. From our experience, most of the feedback for improvement that you will receive, you are receiving them at the beginning when you just release a product or when it's a new user. So basically, this is kind of beginner feedback. And quite often, it's just because they're not familiar with the product, the ecosystem. And this is not exactly worth to make your API more complex for that. You should help them grow and learn. This is also a very good way to protect yourself against those statistical bias and the imposters issues. And finally, this is a way to, of course, control your cost. You can only implement what is needed little by little. So now that we have seen a few ways to really prioritize better and handle the feedback better, now we're sure to deliver value. Can we consider that we are done with the feedback? I think we should not forget the most important part on it, and that we're not doing that for ourselves. We're doing that for the users. And we need to come back to the user. Every time you are doing a feedback, even if it's a small one, please come back to your user. This is a very good opportunity to talk about your product, talk about your company and your value, and to not have bad story like the tweet I mentioned at the beginning. And for that, you are not alone. You can also count on DevRel. Anna, can you tell us?
Mm-hmm. So as developer relations, we support marketing, communication, and product teams by building some technical content that they can use in order to get back to the user. And at the same time, we need to make sure that all our technical assets are up to date. All, for example, our developer guides and our SDKs with the feedback that has been implemented.
Thanks. Another very important aspect is also to measure how well you have answered the feedback and also how much you have increased the value of your product. For instance, as product manager, what I'm looking for is the number of users and the number of transactions. On my side, if after a feedback, I don't see an improvement on those numbers, it means that for sure I have created better, I have answered a feedback, I have enhanced my relationship with one customer, but did I create a better product? I'm not so sure. Now, on DevRel, what are you measuring?
Mm-hmm. We're measuring the customer support cases have some repetitive questions dropped, some repetitive feedback that we used to get a lot. Another thing as developer advocates that we do also is that we build SDKs in different programming languages. So if your team develops an SDK in another language, are your users really using that? And to give you an example, a story with what happened, in our case, we were getting a lot of feedback from hackathons that developers wanted to use mobile SDKs. So indeed, on top of the other SDKs that we had, we developed some mobile SDKs for Android and iOS. After one year and a half, we did an analysis and we found out that, unfortunately, these SDKs were not being used. And what happened is that we fell in the trap of the statistical bias that Gael mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Anna. So now, to wrap it up, so we show you ways to get very specific feedback if you want to improve particular part of your product or your process. We also show you tips to really improve the way you are handling and prioritizing feedback. And finally, don't forget or neglect to come back to your user and measure how well you are answering the needs. That will really make the difference in improving your product.
And keep in mind that developer feedback can really shape your product and who you are. That's why pay a lot of attention on how you gather it, how you prioritize, and how you evaluate it, and developers are really going to appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.